we are very sorry, and I am personally very sorry for the stream problem, but then maybe we'll have more kind of, let's say, dynamic discussion, because we are we can see each other here on Zoom. So, okay, without no further ado, I will say, because we already lost some time, I will give the voice to Anna Sivula, who will introduce a kind of theoretical approach to the cultural sustainability as one of the aspects of sustainability that we will be discussing today. So, Anna, please.
Hello, everybody. I'm Anna Sivula, and I'm a professor of cultural heritage studies at the University of Turku, Finland. Yesterday, I visited the birthday party of the Finnish Museum of Games. There were more than 300 visitors. We did not fly to Tampere to participate this event. This birthday party was a good example of sustainable culture. It was, however, not actually an example of cultural sustainability. The concept of cultural sustainability was invented 25 years ago. The cultural sustainability is the fourth pillar of sustainability, together with the traditional three pillars of economic, political, and ecological sustainability. There was a vivid discussion in the chat of Finnish Museum of Games birthday event. There was a lot of nostalgia in the air. Many participants were sharing their personal memories. Cultural heritage is an emotional process. There is an active cultural heritage community around the Finnish Museum of Games. In the museum, they preserve and conserve tangible and intangible game cultural things. But those things are not what cultural heritage is all about. Cultural heritage is a process of sustaining the meaning and memories of something to make the meaning and memories last a little longer. This is actually the core idea of cultural sustainability. Without the sustaining of cultural heritage, an outdated gaming platform would be nothing but a piece of trash or a leftover. If there, however, is a heritage community sustaining the meaning and memories, the outdated gaming platform becomes worth of preserving as an example or evidence of the past game culture. Heritage community is the group of people that keeps the cultural heritage alive. If the community stops working, the tangible heritage returns to ruins, waste, or leftovers, and the intangible heritage is forgotten if not documented. The value of cultural heritage is often based on the old age of the item or a milestone argument. Milestone of 100 years is very usual. You need time to pass a heritage from a human generation to another. In game culture, the switch from one generation to another is faster. In 4 years, several artificial generations have passed by. A 4-year-old gaming platform represents the past. It is obvious that the idea of cultural sustainability is not the core idea of the game culture. The core idea of game culture is gaming. Game cultures do not live for the cultural sustainability. They are cultures of moving on. They are in constant cultural transition. And the constant transition leaves behind piles of trash. Even though some of the trash is chosen to be preserved as cultural heritage. And that is why it's now perhaps time to move on from the 25-year-old idea of cultural sustainability to the more simple idea of the sustainable culture or culture of sustainability. From the point of view of game cultural heritage, this means that the less there is tangible heritage passed to the next generation, the better. Culture of sustainability is the culture of intangible heritage. The less this generation leaves long-lasting tangible heritages to the next one, the more sustainable is our culture. And this, I think, is the core idea in the transition from the cultural sustainability to the culture of sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Maria had to leave to figure out what's wrong with the stream, so we will continue for a moment without her. But here was the first presentation, and I think we move on to the second one now. So please, the next one in line.
Right, can you hear me, guys?
We can, thank you.
Okay, let me see if I can also share my screen. Are you seeing the slide?
Yes, we are seeing it.
Okay, very nice. Yeah, I really don't know how to follow up on the profoundly theoretical discussion that Anna has provided. Mine will be very superficial and very example-based. Oh yeah, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Mihail Fedotov, and I'm a lecturer in the Digital Learning Games program at Talon University. And the name of the program itself suggests that board games, which is the topic of my today's short presentation, is not actually my natural habitat. This is more of an attempt for me to try and sort of reach beyond my comfort zone. But basically, if you follow board games, which I don't, you might have noticed as well that there has been a sort of a movement towards environmentalism, or a lot of environmental sustainability themed games in recent years. And I just wanted to briefly name some examples and look at some of the features of the board game medium as such when it comes to this particular subject matter. So I'm going to start with the examples, and you don't really see this, okay, never mind. Hopefully you can see the title a little bit. So this is probably the better known example when it comes to board games and environmentalism. It's called CO2. It's been around for a number of years. It's a sort of hybrid cooperative competitive game that is sort of similar to Monopoly in that it's basically about making a profit. It is a capitalist game in terms of what kind of ideology it represents, but also in the process, each player has this responsibility for not ruining the environment, because the actions you take in the game have an environmental footprint. And if everybody's being completely greedy and selfish and focusing on just making as much money as they can, the planet collapses and everybody dies. So that is the hybrid bit there. So that is basically a nice example of a game that encourages people to work together even as they're pursuing their own separate business interests in the world of the game. Now for something completely different, an example that I encountered at a game-based learning conference a few years back. So there's an anthropologist who's currently based in Australia. Her name is Astrid Wichet. And she is an environmental anthropologist who travels mostly around the Pacific islands and examines the environmental issues that communities are encountering there. And one of the things she learned when she was on an island in the Kiribati Islands is there's a lot of environmental issues brought about by unsustainable farming practices. And that is basically, at least in part, due to the situation that people aren't really educated in the subject matter. There's like one internet connected computer on the entire island. And she was thinking of, how do I try to get across some basic ideas about maybe, you know, the effects of the actions that you do when you farm on your environment. And she noticed that people do actually play a lot of bingo and basic board games. So she went for designing an environmentally themed board game for that particular community. No time to talk more about that, but rather an interesting example of a practical project. This is a more recent one, Tiny Footprint. It's a Swedish developed Kickstarter-backed game. Basically, the idea is that players pick characters in the game that represent themselves as closely as possible. And then as those characters in the game, they try to enact changes in their lives that contribute to a lesser environmental footprint. And also the promotion campaign for the game itself sort of doubled as an environmental awareness campaign as well, which is the power of Kickstarter there. For a slightly different take, here's a completely community-based open source project called, rather predictably perhaps, Save the Planet. It's open source. All the resources are available for people to download. It's a do-it-yourself thing, so you can actually build it if you have a 3D printer in luck. If not, there's Other options like cardboard available, and people around the world have been contributing new rules, new features to the game as well. So it's an ongoing community project, which just shows a whole different direction of how environmental games can proceed. 1 minute left, crap. So very quickly, why do we consider board games an important medium to look into other than just, beyond video games? Partly, I think, as Astrid's example illustrates there, it's a more accessible medium for a lot of people who are not into gaming necessarily, and also for a lot of people who don't have regular access to technology. Then there's the aspect of the more immediate social interaction that happens in a board game session context, which itself has its own implications I'm not going to go to. The rule system is basically more transparent because it's up to the players to uphold the rules. It's easier to understand, which also means that if there's an embedded procedural rhetoric that models some environmental processes on a basic level, it's easier for the players to understand what those rules are. It's sort of more flexible if some of the rules are difficult or the difficulty curve isn't quite there, you can play around with it. And the games themselves do have a significantly smaller environmental footprint, as in you do need some resources to produce them, but they don't consume energy or anything like that when you play them. That doesn't actually mean, I'm just keeping that on the screen while I'm chatting because I have no time to comment, doesn't actually mean that there's no considerations or no issues with that. For one thing, the environmental footprint is still there, and there's a lot of room for improvement in the commercial board game industry. So you could emphasize more recyclable materials. There's a lot of plastic being used, which could be substituted for wood or cardboard or biodegradable wrap for the packaging. The whole distinction between board games and video games is itself problematic because now we have AR board games and other things I don't have time to go into. But also, if you look at the board games in the more traditional sense, there's a number of things that they do struggle with, where they are sort of complementary with the video game medium as well, when we need sort of both. It's difficult to model more complex systems and mechanics because it has to be easy enough for people to understand and enact the rules. You don't have a computer to uphold the rules. It's not a very social distancing friendly activity. So amid lockdown and restrictions on who can visit whom and how you can interact with people, board games are slightly more challenging than they used to be to play. A lot of the projects that I've seen being done on the environmental issues are kind of limited in terms of the fun factor. When they are very explicitly educational, like Save the Planet, doesn't get a lot of people excited if they're not initially into environmentalism and things. But also one consideration that occurred to me when I was looking at the example that I had with Kiribati was this colonial aspect of there's people from the developed world that has its own environmental issues coming to developing countries and showing and teaching them how to do things with their own island, which can be problematic if you look at the whole post-colonial perspective of it. But again, I don't have the time to really talk about it. So sorry for taking more time than I was allotted, but that's it from me. On to the next speaker.
Thank you, Mihail. And I think we can immediately move on to the next speaker. So please.
Yes, thank you. I will share my screen and I will move here to and illustrate what Mihail was talking about. So, and Mihail, you can breathe for a while and get some oxygen in your brain there. So me and Mihail work together. My name is Tiinu Jesmin and I'm from School of Digital Technologies, also from Talon University. And we both teach in this digital learning games curricula. Although, yes, we talked about that we teach more about digital games, I'm still into quite a lot of board games. And here I am to talk about one example that we made. And it's a very specific one because it's very specifically designed to teach complex environmental concepts. And it is developed by a lot of people, and it's called The World Ends in Kurtna. So how did it come to life? This is the Jaanus Terasmaa. He's a professor of eco-hydrology, and he's teaching at the university, and he was looking for ways how to illustrate or how to teach this complex concept of ecosystem services. Because being if you want to think in environmental saving ways, you need to understand how ecosystem services work and how humans and nature connect to each other. And he found that there's none games. He thought that the game would be a good medium, and he found out that there are no games. And we accidentally met, and I happened to be a junior researcher of serious games. And so we started to develop a game, and we included students. So back in 1918, already we made our first interdisciplinary student project. And they decided that this board game is the best way how to teach this concept. Next year, we developed it further with another project. And last year, we had one bachelor student, Maris Morel from Natural Sciences, who is making this game her thesis. But it's still an unfinished process. So about the game itself, I go very quickly because I have a video to show you. The place that it takes place is a real place in east of Estonia. The game itself is an actual map. It has all the characteristics of a map. And each piece of land has 3 values: ecosystem, tourism, and local happiness. So you have to keep these 3 in mind. But each player has a role to play. They're very diverse roles, like a businessman, a capitalist, a tree hugger, eco-terrorist, teachers, scientists, and so on and so forth. And all the events that happen in the game, or you can make happen, are actually connected to the local culture and local events. And although you have a role, you can still play according to your conscience. Are you willing to go over each other to achieve your goal or not? But each action you make has an effect on the board and the overall status, which is the doomsday clock, which is ticking on the bad side or good side, negative, positive side, according to your choices. We also have a pre-test and post-test questionnaire to evaluate if the students' knowledge about ecosystem services has developed during playing the game. But it's a very finely refined game, but we still are looking for funding to actually produce it. And here's a small video how it was done. So paper prototyping, the concept, we went thoroughly through game design, game rules. We had altogether more than 20 people now working on this game. At first, we had 3D printed mushrooms that were knobs to play with, but we switched for more sustainable used Lego men. So we can use the Lego pieces as game pieces. So here's you can see the process. There's a lot of different types of cards. First of all, you have your row cards. Then you have development cards. You have sustainable cards, and you have a variety of them. And it's up to you which one you choose. So you have a goal according to your role, but how to achieve it according and in a collaboration with the others, it's up to you. What's your conscience? So if you are an eco-terrorist, you can do it, even that role you can play in a more sensible way. And also there are these unpredictable events. So if the doomsday clock starts moving too rapidly, so the doomsday is coming closer, you get a lot of cumulative negative effects. So sometimes it really happens that you make one bad choice and the doomsday clock just starts to, so another negative, another and another, and the world ends. But the whole idea is that you can work together, communicate with each other, and make sure that the doomsday clock stays on the yellow or the green zone, so that doomsday doesn't come. And then if the doomsday doesn't come, then somebody who achieves their role wins. And
Okay. Thank you, Trino. I think it's time now to move on to the last speaker. So we have Patrick Prax, and please, 5-minute introductory lecture.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Do you see my screen? Everything works out perfect. Okay, great. So this lecture is titled "Not Another Crying Indian on the Need for Systemic Change." I'll hope that I'll be able to get that title to make sense to you towards the end of these 5 minutes. My name is Patrick, and I am a games and media researcher doing critical work around participation, typically, and now also working and branching into questions of cultural heritage, but also sustainability. There's a mild trigger warning for this talk. There's some racist imagery and some ecosystem destruction and some extreme pictures of waste. Starting out here, we all know about this, right? One of the basically inherited sins of digital technology and most digital gaming is that it's built on rare earth and rare metals that are most of the time procured from conflict areas, mined in the most abusive ways on the planet, and then traded through these big international corporations, assembled in ways that very clearly could be called something like a wage slavery or slavery at all, in factories that have to install suicide nets in order to keep the people from dying when jumping off the roof, all so that we can maintain a culture of throwing away our devices and turning them into e-waste as quickly as possible. We can see that kind of issue with sustainability. Of course, that is obviously staring us in the face. We also already mentioned energy usage and these kind of perspectives. We also have the issue of how game content is produced in ever faster and ever quicker release schedules for digital production games that are coming out on the App Store, on the different platforms, hundreds a day, with still sort of one after the other of issues around the games industry exploiting its workers with high levels of churn, exploitation, and crunch times. This is a beautiful piece of an article from Chia quoting Duffy. Entrepreneurial subjects in creative industries must swallow their anxiety, shoulder their precarity, and eke out a sense of self-worth and respectability, all for a chance to not get paid to do what they love. Right, so this mixture of you have to become the perfect corporate citizen, shape yourself, mold yourself into somebody who can get employed, and then still deal with this precarity, this insecurity, impossibility to raise a family, for example, because you have no idea whether or not you'll be employed. We do all of this in a global crisis. We have the idea that maybe after COVID, things will return to some sort of normality, even though it's already quite clear that that's not going to be a change, not going to be the case. Wash your hands and all will be well. Hey, it's not maybe going to get so much better so quickly. This particular comic having apparently hit the zeitgeist so squarely that it is the most published and most shared work of this particular author ever. So in this situation, what is the point of the crying Indian? Like, we are in a point where really it would seem that now we are in crisis in so many ways. We should sort of all look at this, pull at the same direction and sort out what is going on here, try to somehow alleviate all of these crises that are happening at the same time. So here I want to take a look at something that is maybe a good example for something that is going on in terms of sustainability crisis and sustainability politics, but a bit more easy to understand than the extremely complex area of games and also digital media and entertainment. And that is in this case plastic waste, especially plastic recycling. Many of you are probably still, just like me, recycling plastic, putting it nicely into the plastic recycling waste, even though plastic recycling is basically non-existent. There's an insane amount of plastic waste that has been sold to China that is now stopping to accept it, because even the most useful kinds of plastic are just piling up in gigantic mountains pressed together and are completely useless. Their prices of oil are so low that nobody is really recycling plastic. So it's just not an existing thing. So why do we have an infrastructure devoted for that? Why do we have an added new trash can for that? Well, because that was part of a political campaign from the side of plastic producers. At the point where political pressure was mounting to actually do something in terms of systemic change around plastic, one of their biggest moves was to turn plastic usage from a systemic perspective to an individual perspective. And one of the particularly insidious parts of that was the ad campaign or advertisement that was called The Crying Indian, Keep America Beautiful. It features this Native American who's steering his canoe through an industrial dystopia, and in the end looking at this beautiful country with this one tear running down his eyes. Oh wait, I'm not. Do you still have the same picture from the start?
Yes.
So.
Oh Jesus, why is that? Okay, great. That that is excellent. Cool. Thank you. Why? Okay, interesting. Well, now you get this really quickly. That didn't work out. How did I mess that up? Yep. So here we are, at least at the Crying Indian picture. So let's call that a lag. So the question is, right, what is this? And by the way, this is of course also not really a Native American. It was just that is adding the entire colonialist racist element to that as well. This is a red face, I guess. So just adding insult to injury here. So the question that sort of poses in my mind is, so what is really going on? Do we need to learn what to do, or do we know what we need to do and just need to figure out how to make it politically possible? Right? What is really this crisis about? Because there is a possibility, quite real possibility, that somebody is benefiting from keeping this crisis going and keeping this and not interrupting this way towards Armageddon. Right? Are we all sitting in the same boat, or can somebody set and control the discourse in the way that they did it with plastic, turning it into an issue, right? While the tears running down the cheek of that Native American that really isn't one, somebody saying in the background, "People started it, people can't stop it," which is exactly not the case. It's a system, it's a systemic issue. So by framing it that way, like maybe then they can predict what kind of things we can come up with to do something about it. So the point here would be to question this most obvious thing, this individual responsibility. We all need to do our part, and instead take a look at what is the systemic thing that is happening here? What do we need to do collectively in order to change how we live and produce things, right? So in the words of Noam Chomsky and Michel Foucault, to criticize the working of institutions which appear to be both neutral and independent, to criticize them in such a manner that the political violence, which has always been exercised itself obscurely through them, will be unmasked so that one can fight them. So that would be the call that I'm seeing there. Let's not have another Crying Indian. Let's not have another reduction to individuals. Let's not get lost in figuring out how we can limit how much paper we use for our board game. But let's just try to see how we can get together and work on systemic change. Last, a little plug. There's a temporary working group in game studies on the Nord Media Conference that has its deadline coming up on 19th of February, where we are doing and looking to do this kind of social justice work with a focus on games. And we would, of course, be happy and welcoming your submissions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much to all the speakers. So yeah, everyone is experiencing a bit of technical issues today, I guess.
So sorry.
No, come on, no problem. I was thinking that because, somewhat the format has entirely changed, so we just have this nice seminar. So maybe let's go straight to the discussion and questions from our audience here. So who would like to go first? Hands up.
There's a few in the chat, I think.
Okay. New message. Okay, there are questions in the chat. Okay, so Jana, would you like to elaborate with your human voice?
I do have one. I was just curious about Mihail's examples and whether those were kind of the best or clearest examples from a scholarly point of view, or most kind of successful ones, or most playable ones.
Yeah, so if I'm being honest, I wasn't really trying to provide a very good sample. It was basically just looking at things that are as diverse as I could find. So the idea was, You have one game designed for a specific community in a very small scope. You have one commercial game, one Kickstarter game, one open source game. But as far as their value as games, as far as how playable they are, I have my reservations. I haven't actually played all of them. I certainly didn't play the Kiribati one, for example, and I didn't play the Kickstarter one because I couldn't find it. But a concern that I try to sort of briefly point to during my talk as well is that with some of these games, there's a very clear sort of didactic intent. And people do have, especially learners and schools and adult education to some extent as well, people sometimes are resistant to the idea of being taught when it's just very in your face, right? We're going to save the world, let's play this board game. And people are going to be skeptical. So in terms of just sort of sneaking this ideology into the game rather than proselytizing, I think CO2 is actually quite a good one. It's also probably the better known one as well. I haven't played it, but there is a second version called CO2 Second Chance. And it has, if anyone uses Board Game Geek, which is sort of the IMDb for board games, it has 7.7 rating, which is actually quite high because it's board gamers are this very picky community. So to have a rating in the 7s or the 8s is actually quite impressive. So it does seem to work as a game. And largely, I think that's because it doesn't really claim to be an educational game first. It's a regular board game. It just happens to be about the environment. And I think maybe that is something that needs to be considered as well from the standpoint of how palatable it is to the actual target audience, which would be either the broader communities or learners in, let's say, environmental sustainability courses. I hope I answered your question because by this point I forgot what it was. Sorry.
I think you did. Thank you. Perfect.
Okay, so Janne, do you want to have another question for someone, or because I don't see any hands in the air? But I see a question from Laura Tutrino.
Yeah, I think I have 2 questions there.
Yes.
So first to answer Jonas one. So there are for the roles in the game, there are different roles. For instance, there are actually different like eco-terrorists as well. But for one eco-terrorist, it could be like close down 3 industries. So you can the other who are capitalists or local entrepreneurs, they have the vice versa. You need to open 3 either their tourism shops or some agricultural, you can grow sheep and so on. It's specified in your specific role. And the other is like vice versa. They're trying to close them. But we also had, to give you an example, how one eco-terrorist decided to win was that he opened up his own industries and destroyed them. So he didn't conflict with other players. So they achieved their roles by themselves. So the roles are very, very different. They are more intense, like the capitalist and the eco-terrorist, but there's also scientists and teachers who are more mild. So they have to go and do, because there are in ecosystem services, there are such things as they're called cultural services, which are actually like berry picking and mushroom picking and recreational things. So they have to do these activities rather than this industry activities, and they have a different impact on the board game, the Kurtna area themselves. So that's one of the things. And originally, we actually developed the game for upper secondary and high school, which is from 7th to 12th grade. Because we looked for curricula. The national curricula says that the ecosystem services are mentioned there, but they're rarely never taught when we made the interviews with teachers. But we have tested it so many times. The youngest have been a bit more than 10 years, and the oldest have been university staff members. And there's no age differences except one thing. The younger you are, the quicker you pick up the rules. the older you are, you don't start playing, you start questioning before you go and try to understand and put your hands, actually start doing things. So in that sense, this age group we went for is more broader than we expected, because so far our research shows that it has taught everybody something. Thank you.
Okay, I think Anna had the question that was answered in the meantime. I have a question. Oh, and Patrick actually shared his slides in the discussion in the chat. So so if you want to take a look later, you can. So yeah, I personally really like the kind of the punchline of Patrick's talk. Do we really know what to do? Because, you know, in a way, especially speaking about games, I think that the main message about games and gaming is that, you know, we are using too much electricity. And that's basically, you know, this is why it's bad. And then from the kind of game culture perspective, of course, all the kind of social justice issues around the working place environment and the crunch culture. But, you know, those are just like two little aspects of it. So what do you think, and that's the question to all of the speakers, is really missing from the conversation here?
So if you want to, I can start. Right. So I mean, it's always easy to say this kind of things like, oh yeah, we need to think systematically. But the thing is that even just taking one small step forward in that direction becomes very, very tricky because it's so insanely complex. Right. So and this, especially notions of ecological, but also cultural sustainability connect insanely hard issues. Like immediately when you bump against something like intergenerational justice, you're like, oh wow, great. That's basically one of the things that lie there right at the start that you need to think about. That is insanely emotionally charged. It contains discussions around economic systems and their validity that are super, basically burned into people's lived experiences that you would need to address and have a conversation about. So that already becomes very, very difficult. So it's very hard to do, and it requires, at least that is something that I have experienced, a safe space for people to actually be able to say something and making themselves a little bit vulnerable without somebody immediately exploiting the fact that they haven't presented every possible caveat to something that they want to pitch. Right. So also in that sense, I'm not saying that, oh, board games are not leading anywhere. I think they are a great step to influencing the discourse here, and we need to start somewhere. But I think that the aim needs to be more than let's make the games industry use a little bit less electricity, because that is not really helping us. We need to keep in mind that we are trying to go somewhere else, right? So in that, right, it's immediately easy to be destructive. I can say ecosystem services is a bad perspective because it considers ecosystems as something that's only valuable if it commands a price on the market. And that means that the ecosystems that are providing services to rich people are more valuable than those poor people. But that doesn't get us anywhere, right? Of course, you need to have pragmatism, but you also need to have in mind what is our goal in the end here. Yep. So another issue with the camera. But yes, so that would be my point here. And I think that makes it really difficult to get these conversations. But what I'm looking for is an honest conversation where people want to put all these things on the table, accept the insane complexity, and then take a step.
If I could just quickly jump in, and I think Patrick is making a very valid point there, that we need to be having a conversation, and incremental improvements in a disastrous situation is maybe not the biggest goal to aim towards. Although I think if we make incremental improvements, that's already something. My bigger concern is a lot of the time, these smaller things like, oh, we'll reduce the electricity usage, or we'll recycle a little bit more. When we do make a little bit of progress in a situation where we're way behind where we should be really, sometimes people tend to adopt this sort of self-celebratory tone. Like, we did something amazing, like we're the good guys and this is going great. Whereas the fact of the matter is we haven't really made a whole lot of progress at all. So basically my thing is, if we can improve little things, that matters. That matters because it's also something that can incentivize further change. And that's something that can be, you know, promoted and discussed in terms of what more you can do. But yeah, my biggest concern is just that being overly optimistic because of smallish things that we managed to accomplish, because evidently that's not enough. So, which is basically what Patrick was saying all along, but I just wanted to reiterate, I guess.
So I think for the both of your solutions, not solutions, but we have to tackle misconceptions, because we see from the education world that even the teachers who are supposed to teach these complex issues and understanding and how to start this dialogue, they themselves are full of misunderstanding and misconceptions. So this is one of the topic we're actually trying to now tackle in Estonia, to have this conversation, to start to make people understand that their actions value, they have a meaning. And we really hope that it starts from these little things and ends up in really big things. In order to do that, they need to understand that everything's interconnected. They need to understand that everything influences. So yeah, this misconceptions or misunderstanding of the knowledge that's there, it hits really hard.
Okay. I don't see any hands, but if if you would like to join and share your point of view, please just raise your hand or just start talking. I think there's not that many of us really. Anna, I'm really wondering about your point of view here, because your approach with the culture of sustainability is rather systemic. So what would you say here?
You were asking me? Would you repeat, please?
Well, my question is, because your approach basically with the culture of sustainability is a rather kind of systemic approach, right? And as we work together on that issues, you are looking at this kind of United Nations approaches and very from the organizational studies approaches to sustainability. So I would assume you have a little bit different perspective, maybe even more from like policy perspective. So I'm just interested, what do you think are the what we are doing wrong, what we are doing not enough? I'm just curious.
I think it's the concept of cultural sustainability is misunderstanding, and because there is the question of cultural, it cannot be at same level with the other three traditional pillars of sustainability. You may think it with the words. We have four pillars of sustainability: economic sustainability, political sustainability, and ecological sustainability. And then we have an added pillar, the cultural sustainability. Which one of these three traditional pillars does not belong to the realm of culture? I'm just asking. There's economic culture, there's political culture, and ecological culture. But how does it sound if I say that there's also this added cultural culture? It's just seems not to fit there. So we must think about it again, because the solution is always cultural. That was perhaps what I was trying to say.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Microphone was out. Yeah, it's a very kind of it's not an easy issue to kind of even discuss, because as Patrick or Mikhail mentioned, we have so many little things, and then we have so many kind of really bloated and heavily charged topics around it, like the mentioned by Patrick, intergenerational justice, which I think in the end, for me, in a way, it is like the main issue of sustainability, really, right? Because like the basic understanding of sustainability is to kind of think about the generations to come, so the resources we have can be used by them. So I think that kind of keyword here is something, that kind of resonates with me. But then again, when you think about, day-to-day actions, like if we want to kind of organize another seminar, another workshop, like, what we do, then you have really a bit of a struggle. So I kind of envy Terino that, you have this very kind of specific actions that you are doing that are focused on education, and you can see a real impact there. So I think that is very refreshing. Well, I'm not sure if I can talk about the precise context of it, but with Mikhail and Patrick, we're thinking that maybe having, for example, serious games and game jams focused on those issues might be helpful. So, what kind of events we can do and what kind of stakeholders we can involve to kind of move forward with those issues as academics. I'm speaking here, on behalf of Center of Excellence, like trying to figure out, what we can do to help, like today, here and now, so to speak.
Yeah, like if I may, right? This is like, right, this is I think where the pragmatic part comes in. So every step, like the point isn't that something isn't good enough, so you shouldn't be doing it, but it's just that there needs to be an aim somewhere that has to do with changing systemic issues. But on the other hand, any avenue works, right? In industrial change, for example, we're in for example, the games industry now, talking about typically digital, but of course also analog. That would be a great way to set in the industrial guidelines, create first white papers, then best practices that could help that. So I think that a lot of that has come from there. But again, it needs to happen also with an understanding that this cannot just be, we appoint a sustainability officer, do some small changes, now it looks pretty, and then the sustainability officer, really the only function that they have is to be a part of the PR efforts of that company to look nice. It needs to aim for some actual change somewhere down the road. And I think a big part of it needs to also be top down. And this is where I think we as researchers should oftentimes maybe be braver or more active in seeking impact on public policy. Because I think that is something that is not happening so much, or not so much as it should. So I am just starting to try to look to the direction, because I don't know, like especially as a PhD student still, I was just frankly very much intimidated and always thinking that probably somebody else knows this better than me. Like I think that we're not doing enough, but that's probably just because I haven't seen what these very knowledgeable people on top of there have going on. But I've come to the realization somewhere in my mid-30s that that's not the case. So I think there's a real need for people that want to take that conversation and step up, and researchers to, for example, hey Kleines, to be part of a public conversation, and to also really participate in policymaking, because I think that we are sorely lacking there, and we are leaving that sort of arena to other people. So I think that's something for us.
Yeah, I think the policy making point is very interesting. I don't know if Franz, you are still here. Maybe not, but with Franz, in general, within Center of Excellence, we were discussing, you know, what kind of goals the Centers of Excellence can have in a kind of long term. And one of them was, you know, trying to work towards sustainable game cultures. And I guess within the Finnish context, Anna, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, I guess one of the outputs of the Center of Excellence can actually be what Patrick is saying. But I guess I would be at a certain point interested if it's just, you know, having this sort of conversations, or are there any specific ways of, you know, creating change? So has anyone in the audience or from our speakers had experience of kind of directly impacting policy, or seeing that, you know, the actions they are undertaking are being heard by politicians or you know, local governments, for example? I'm kind of curious if we already have examples like that.
I can speak, I think, on behalf of education in Estonia, or these EU Sustainable Development Goals are very, very popular to mention here in Estonia everywhere. So they are like a very almost worldwide stated, sometimes quite clearly stated goals. And I think a lot, they have become like very popular guidelines. So a lot of teachers use them, a lot of policymakers use them. So they're like given as an example that these are the goals that we want to reach, or these are the aspects we have to consider. So these UN goals are very popular.
Can I just maybe chip in as the skeptical voice? Because I think there is action where we're seeing, again, incremental signs of improvement, but a lot of the time my perception seems to be that, yes, they're part of the discourse. Yes, we do hear them. Yes, we have, so the part of the university mission at Talon University, Sustainable Development, and then you have invited speakers from different, you know, sides of the political spectrum come in and have these conversations, but it ends at the discursive level a lot of the time. So again, people just make each other happy to be part of a community that is having a conversation, but then a lot of the time that seems to be where it ends. So my concern is, what kind of leverage do we have to actually try to push people in the legislative sphere, but also in the industry, not just to be having conversations, which is also very useful, obviously, as a starting platform, but to be doing something meaningful that goes beyond just slapping the label of, yes, we're sustainable, yes, we're eco-friendly, and we care about the environment, or we care about culture and preservation and heritage and all those other trendy terms that people, a lot of the time, I think, would struggle to explain if they were directly asked in terms of, like, what are you doing?
Yes, and all of that, and this, I guess, is trying to get the point that I also get across, is like all of that isn't just happening sort of where the only issue is that people aren't starting to move, or that they're set in their ways, but that there's another side to that conflict, somebody who's actively working to keep things the way they are going, right? So that is what this, why it's a struggle, right? There's another side with considerable resources that is working on dismantling intellectually honest discussions about these extremely difficult topics, and is succeeding, right? So that is where we get, instead of a conversation about post-carbon future, we get to the electric car, right? And we see all of this happening again and again, that it gets broken down to an individual level, so that you can now guilt your neighbors because they have been flying. Great, now you can feel smugly good about yourself, or you can buy ecological, like clothes produced but that doesn't change anything about global food chains. So it's like it's the thing like, you're not bad. We still need to buy locally. We still need to do all that stuff, but the aim has to be bigger than that. It cannot be about us feeling we have done our part. No, we haven't. Like this is sadly not it, right? And this is so hard for people to get their head around. Like if you are turning on Michael Jackson, right, and it's running in the background, like if you want to make the world a better place, look at yourself and make a change, and everybody's like yes, and I'm like no, sorry, that's not it. That's not what we need. Yeah, sure, but what we need is we need to do this together, and that is not easy to wrap your head around.
Nice. So basically what to do. So this is not just like, a therapy session for us.
Exactly.
Trying to feel better about ourselves. Yes. Good. But yeah, I'm kind of in a similar place, I think, with the frustration, that we have all this nice kind of 17 United Nations sustainability goals, or however there are, and all this beautiful hashtags, and so much is happening, with the new sustainability kind of strategies for different institutions, etc. But yeah, it's just really kind of hard to sometimes see specific actions unless you are Turku and you are just designing games. Yeah, but maybe let's move now to the area where I think some of us did actually something, more or less practical in their lifetimes about video game. I'm speaking about video game preservation and sustainability and kind of cultural sustainability in that area, because speaking of preservation of games, we are speaking of cultural sustainability, because what is being preserved is mostly the heritage, right? So that is the cultural resource we are talking about here. And I think some of us published on this topic, but I still think we are, far from having any white papers that would encompass, the problem in its intergenerational complexity. But could you tell us something about your research in that area?
In the area of the cultural sustainability, absolutely, right? So one of the
and game preservation specifically.
Yes, exactly. So we have been working a little bit in a project with, for example, the Swedish National Swedish Museum for Science and Technology around their exhibition that was called Game On, and also now their self-developed Play Beyond Play. And one of the big elements, I think, is exactly what Anna has been alluding to, taking a step from artifacts and this sort of heritage objects towards intangible heritage, towards these sort of practices and things that people are actually doing, which with gaming is very tricky. But the big advantage that comes with that is that we can take a step back from having just this long line of this game or this console was released at that point, and then you walk it down and you've walked down the history of games, and instead look at what people are actually doing. And then something that comes up, and that is a huge issue for preservation and also for exhibition, is the insanely participatory way in which games culture and games get produced by people, not necessarily by an industry. So it's just by taking a closer look at it and by discarding the previously held notion that culture is made by an industry and looking at it how it's really made a little bit more granular, or with a little bit like zooming in a little bit more, you already get down to people and their sharing practices. You take a step away from the companies and see that, for example, games culture has always been queer, right? One of the titles of a book that has just come out that we could all have gotten if we would have looked a little bit closer and seen the ants instead of the anthill. So all of these small beautiful elements that are in there, and preserving them, they are there. We need to sort of keep and hold on to them and look at them as people and outside of just the artifacts. And I think then we can get a lot of super interesting things out of there that can help us also in this situation. In an environment where, for example, we look for games as our shared culture to make sense of this sort of crisis that is very heavily involved with big corporations that are exploiting resources. Games could, for example, be another case where exactly that thing happened, where our collective innovation, making new genres, making new kinds of play, new kinds of interacting, have been colonialized and have been exploited, have been locked into intellectual property legislation, and commodified in the same way in which that happens to many other resources. And that could really help us shine a light on that in this kind of environment.
Yes, I definitely agree. Anyone else would like to join that subject? Niklas?
Yeah, I'm sort of just listening here and nodding my head to what Patrick is saying, and once again eloquently put. And I kind of agree with you on the idea that we need to look at the actual play practices and what people are actually doing with products, and not just think of culture as an industry or products. And I guess that's what we're trying to do at the Finnish Museum of Games already, and sort of starting to maybe see the wider impact of this kind of change in perspective when we're talking with the wide variety of hobbyist preservationists, and they're also kind of getting that, oh, okay, maybe we should be more interested in these things than only the games as products. And I feel that's super nice at the moment, and there's lots of good dialogue going on, and we are getting very interesting sort of propositions from people who have maybe on their own dig up something that wouldn't maybe be that interesting from an game industry perspective, but is interesting from a sort of more participatory culture perspective, perhaps. So that's one thing, and yeah, and of course, I'm also super interested in the sort of ecological sustainability issue here, because clearly there's some problems here, especially if we sort of try to preserve everything that our culture is producing. It just sort of keeps on snowballing and snowballing, and very soon we will have like huge amounts of data, and preserving those huge amounts of data might become quite problematic if at the same time we're also producing new stuff. So I think that's also something that we need to really discuss. I guess these two ideas come to mind at the moment, but I'm happy to discuss more.
Anna, you wanted to say something? Your
Yes, very good comment, Anna, and that's completely true. And I sort of we saw the kind of power of this heritage community yesterday when we had our birthday party online, and we get lots of propositions from kind of private individuals or groups, and lots of donations, and everything kind of goes forward with the help of a community, and that's what's motivating me to work with the museum. And also, yeah, it makes it more sustainable, but it's because it's kind of the museum helps and maybe can point towards things that haven't been done yet, but it's kind of done together with a larger community, and I guess that's one way to make it sustainable. Don't really know how to sort of take these lessons and put them into action in some other sphere of culture, but yeah, would be happy to think about it at least.
Yeah, if I could kind of follow up here. Oh, Anna, you wanted to say something, please.
No.
Yeah, you're good?
Please go on.
No, I was just thinking, because I wanted to make a similar point that Niklas did by kind of comparing it to the Polish situation, because, you know, so I was referring a lot to what Patrick said about this intergenerational kind of connections here, which, let's just say, go kind of vertically through the kind of layers of time. But also, you know, within our own layer of time, we have to look at the horizontal sort of connections and kind of collaborations that we can make, because I'm always amazed how well the game heritage community is integrated in Finland. And it's still like, you know, I'm considering different factors here. Is it like the size of the country that it's, you know, you just have like this one museum and then it works, and in like bigger countries, you have different centers that want to be the preservation centers. And like in Poland, you have many museums and many kind of institutions that are just basically fighting for funding for preservation, trying to be the institution for that. And you have different local communities that are, yeah, basically in competition. And then, so that is kind of national problem that I see in Poland. And then also in Poland, there is unfortunately a lot of mistrust in between academia and the retro gaming communities, which is not an issue in Finland. Like it works just like as a, you know, well-greased machine. It's just really, it's very impressive. But then speaking on a kind of international level here, with, you know, all the different institutions or the different groups and sometimes just, you know, individual funds trying to make a difference, you know, without dialogue and collaboration, you know, it cannot be sustainable. So I'm thinking that we are kind of missing the collaborative aspects here. And that was one of the reasons we launched this collaborative game seminar at the Finnish Museum of Games, and hope to kind of continue this conversation. So from my perspective, I think, you know, connecting the people working on the subject here, so we are aware of other people are doing, and you know, we try to kind of not compete but work together. I think that would be best. And Finland can be always kind of shown as a case that, you know, it actually works, which is kind of helpful, I would say.
Yeah, thanks for those. Maybe I follow up quickly. Sort of, it's super nice that it looks that way, and of course there's some truth in that as well. So I guess one big thing is the size of Finland. It's sort of, I've been in the Finnish Museum of Game project since the start, since 2014 or something, and I'd say that we put quite a lot of effort into this, and it wasn't that clear when we started that this is how it's gonna be. We gave it the name of Finnish Museum of Games, and that also already has some sort of controversy in it. It's located in Tampere, not in Helsinki, which is the game industry capital. There's a lot of sort of potential controversy there. When we started out, there was some people weren't quite sure about this because there were quite many established hobbyist collectors, maybe with their own exhibitions even, who were sort of worried what's going to happen now. Sort of, can we continue our work if these people from Tampere sort of say that they're the national museum? And it's, yeah, it's always kind of difficult this as well as sort of getting the trust of the game industry and the game makers and the people, the donors, potential donators. That's will take time, and sort of we also put quite a lot of time into discussing with other heritage institutions like the National Library, like other museums in Finland, and sort of try to overcome these obstacles. And I guess we kind of succeeded in them. And yeah, well, if it looks like a greased machine from the side, I guess we kind of made quite a nice progress.
I have a question to Niklas. How important do you think that is the national narrative on the, well, heroic Finnish game industry?
Yeah, that's a good question, and sort of maybe that's kind of where we started when we started the museum project. That was where the heritage community was going. It was very interested in these key figures, in these mythic figures, maybe. Especially like two people they couldn't interview anymore. Jukka Tapanimäki, who was dead, who had made games from the Commodore 64, and Stavros Fasoulas, who doesn't make any public appearances and hasn't done that in 30 years or something. So these people became kind of legends, and they were the ones who gave birth to the Finnish game industry. And of course, there's some truth in this. They did make some sort of very early important things, but if we only look at sort of heroic figures, it's more difficult to see everything else. Or if we only look at the successful Finnish game companies, the long-term companies, Housemarque and Remedy and the others, it's going to be difficult to see the ones that didn't succeed, who maybe made games which never became international hits or something like that. So that was something that we quite a lot discussed in our kind of curatorial group, which had academians, which had collectors, which had museum professionals, which had educational professionals. And I guess the most heated discussions we had were about these things. What are we going to tell about? Are we going to tell sort of put Finnish game industry on a pedestal that say that these are the heroes that made this possible? Or are we going to look at the people who maybe didn't succeed, didn't get their games published, made controversial games or something like this, which in my idea, maybe it makes it more interesting if we can sort of show the breadth and the different motivations and also the non-successful, or not in an economic sense successful, but maybe in another way successful game makers. So just these are some ideas. Yeah. Thanks for the question.
And how important is the language?
The Finnish language.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about, well, it is important, the language, yes. And maybe it also says something that we've had some problems sort of locating games made in, or communities dealing with games made in different languages than Finnish. We sort of succeeded with the Finnish language, but the Swedish speaking Finns, maybe there is a sort of game culture there, but we haven't been able to interact with it. Or I don't know, Sami speaking Finns or Russian speaking Finns or anyone else, or maybe the newer like Arabic speaking game cultures in Finland or something like that. So the sort of idea of Finland as a monoculture of speaking Finnish really helps here in a way to show that game culture, but maybe some others are then shadowed in a way. We really need to make more effort into this. And there's been some stuff happening already with the Sami, different Sami game jam projects and sort of trying to, also the museum has tried to show also the rich Sami game heritage that kind of exists.
Yeah,
Thanks for the question.
I think the linguistic heritage within the game culture has not been researched yet.
No, not to my knowledge either.
Okay, I think, we are kind of getting towards the end, but I would love to have some questions from, from the people who are not participating so far in the discussion. So if you would like, to share your opinions or thoughts, please raise your hand or just start speaking. I think that's okay. I will give maybe a moment.
Can I just add my 2 cents maybe while people are still thinking
Yes.
of what to ask? Because there is a tangential thing that I wanted to... I've not had the honor of being to the Finnish Video Game Museum just yet. So that's the Corona pandemic prevented me from doing so. But I think with preservation, the larger point that Nicholas's comments raises for me is who gets to control the discourse of what do we preserve? Right, because a lot of the time there has been this sort of, what we're seeing is the game industry is rediscovering the retro gaming community and sort of seeking to co-opt it or to appropriate a lot of it with the relaunch of the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now Nintendo is obviously banning all those pirated websites, and there's the intellectual property issues that Patrick alluded to, but it overlooks a lot of different kinds of gaming. I've slightly published on Flash game preservation, which is the thing that nobody really cares about institutionally, because that's just outside of the context of the conversation about what the classics are. Nobody thinks of Flash games as something major and as part of cultural heritage, although they are, and they're very participatory in terms of how they... I don't want to use this empowering discourse of, people were able to make their own things, but there's a lot of reflection on current events. Well, not so current anymore, but there's a lot of like vernacular heritage you can find there that's not really being present in this whole preservational conversation, I've also collaborated with the Talon Video Game Museum, which starting this year will be part of the National Library of Estonia. And the one cool thing that they do is they preserve a lot of things from the 90s, where there wasn't much of an official game distribution channels in Estonia. So there's a lot of piracy going on there, basically. And they're looking at copycat games, pirated games, crazy compilations where you have Mario playable on a Sega console, these types of things that are completely absent from a lot of these mainstream conversations about, you know, what games used to be like. Because for this community of people in this part of Eastern Europe, well, I guess Estonia doesn't identify as Eastern Europe, but there's a lot of, you know, Soviet legacy there that had to be grappled with. That was completely limiting. So I think it's important to try to highlight these lesser known facets. And the other thing that they do is they try to look at games in conjunction with the broader cultural context. So people are donating all their game consoles and things, but they're also donating furniture that they used to have at their homes in the 90s. And then the idea with the museum is to try to create a traditional living room that you'd have in, let's say, the mid-90s, where you'd have an older TV set where we'd play games. It's tricky from a technical perspective, it's tricky from a space perspective, but this idea of looking beyond gaming or looking on the broader context that games used to be part of and have been part of, and trying to preserve that as well, I think that's quite a valuable thing to be doing.
Thank you, Mikhail.
And yes, September the 12th is one game that actually you can play it, Yone. There's I'm going to post a link later to an emulator for Flash games that you can still use with your browsers.
Yes, it is still possible, which is good because I often use it in my classes.
Same.
Do you say something, or I'm just kind of?
No, I guess I want to say that those are really valid and good points, and thanks for bringing them out in the discussion. And I totally agree with you that these issues are there, but then again, there are some like small first steps into preserving Flash games. We know the heritage communities online already did a huge chunk of work with the Flash package that is going around and has an executionable Flash file that you can actually play the games in the games that they were able to find. And the Finnish museum has been doing some work with Flash games as well, and we have like a Finnish cult favorite, Muumipappa Kalassa, or not so even cult favorite. It's sort of a very much played Flash game now on display in the museum. And the National Library is sort of taking first steps into trying to do something about Flash games as well. So it's going forward, but of course, heritage institutions aren't that fast when they do something. So it might take like 10 years before anything happens. So that's something that we need to take into account as well. And really interesting details about all the sort of people donating furniture and sort of looking at things beyond the playable games, which I think is an important first step into actually understanding what game heritage is.
I think Nicholas made a kind of important point here, which is the source of the tensions between the academic community and the retro gaming community in Poland about game preservation. That basically, like, the retro gamers are like, you know, what have you done? Like, you know, like you are just writing papers, and there is some discussion and some collaboration, but you know, we've been doing this for like 20 years, you know. So I think this is one of the challenges that, you know, when we are having these discussions on the theoretical and kind of academic levels, how to connect this kind of long-term perspective to actually doing something in the very moment, which is, I think, still a challenge for me every day when I'm kind of trying to work with those issues. But I would say from my perspective in the preservation area, I think just discussion between different stakeholders also on the international level, you know, at least with Europe, we have this FGAMP community, and I think not enough kind of retro gamers are involved with that. So I think, I think we just should kind of continue discussing these subjects as maybe partly as a therapy sessions for us, but also hopefully with some added value. So yeah, I guess it's a wrap then, and thank you very much for joining. I once again very much apologize for the streaming troubles. I hope we will figure it out in the next 20 minutes before Henry Woodstock. But the present kind of state of the affairs is that it was recorded and our discussion by Janne, and we will post it on YouTube later this week. And yeah, yes, Mikhail, please.
Oh no, I was just applauding.
That's a high five.
That wasn't. Yeah,
okay,
that was just good job, everyone.
I saw this, so yeah, okay. So yeah, so in general, high five. I guess Patrick, you are also high fiving me.
No,
if you okay, all right.
If you give me the word,
evening.
I'll take it.
Nice evening, and thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.